This is the Protestant Libertarian Podcast, a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute and part of the Christians for Liberty Network. I really hope that you guys enjoy today's show. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. My guest today, coming all the way from the great country of Sweden, is Erik, the man behind the Twitter account at AlphaClassARC. Erik is a self-described Marxist who believes that socialism is the best method of organizing society. He is going to explain his views on Marxism and socialism on the show today, and also discussed why he is opposed to American military imperialism. Erik, welcome to the Protestant Libertarian Podcast.
Hi. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you on the show, man. I've been excited for this for a long time here. And before I ask you about yourself, I just want to let my audience know this isn't really going to be a debate. My show is all about informing people and giving them an education on what people believe and what people think. And so I'm just going to give you an opportunity to explain your position today and lay it all out for us. But before we get into the questions I sent you earlier, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so as you said, my name is Erik. I live in Sweden, born and bred. And I am 26 years old, and I technically live with my parents. It's a house, but it's like separated into two apartments, a lower and upper, and I live in the upper apartment. And most of the time, I also have my girlfriend, who is also my fiance, who sort of lives with me. She has an apartment in another city, but she also lives here. I have autism and ADD, so I'm a little bit special, so to say. And my two biggest interests are video games and politics, and I really enjoy the overlap between the two.
Dude, that's awesome. And again, I one of the things I really appreciate about you is I've had, on Twitter, I'm not a very aggressive person on Twitter, but usually I'll post some things, and sometimes when I talk to a Marxist or whatever, I get a lot of like very angry pushback. But you're someone who is willing to have a conversation, which is why I appreciate your input and why I wanted to have you on the show to talk about this. So before I ask you about your journey to socialism, how would you define socialism and communism? Because I think that those words get thrown around by a lot of people without ever like anchoring them to any concrete definition. So when you use the word socialism or communism, what do you mean by those terms?
Oh, okay. So socialism is basically when the government does a lot of stuff, and communism is when the government takes your toothbrush. Starting off with the jokes.
That's a good one.
No, but yeah, that's sort of like the view many people have on these terms, and understandably so, due to the serious amount of propaganda. But yeah, I would describe socialism as first and foremost, it's an ideology, something that you believe in, that you want society to look like. And as a system, it's basically based on the ideas of a true democracy, where, demos kratos, people rule, where the people, everyone, collectively hold power. It's not just one person or a few, but everyone has a say in how society runs. And it's basically that. And when it comes to the means of production, it's held in common or by the government, which itself is by, for, and of the people. It really, like, there's not one way to do who has ownership of the means of production, if you will. It can be like the people working there directly that owns the stuff, or it can be the government or whatever, but it's still, at the end of the day, the people that have the control of the means of production and society as a whole. And also the principles of collectivism, which I know it's a scary word for many people, but it's not something that excludes the individual, but rather it's how do I say this? It's basically we all live together, right? Like a society is not made up of individuals per se. It's individuals that live together, which automatically create a collective. And then it's this collective in turn that makes a society. And then, so collectivism is about us, because it realizes that all of this is thanks to us as a collective. So it focuses on, well, everyone should have it good, to put it simply.
Yeah, no, that was great. You call yourself a Marxist. What do you mean by that term, and why do you prefer the label Marxist?
Well, not even everyone that is a Marxist or socialist or communist agrees exactly on what they mean by it, but um, what I mean by it is that I'm ideologically a socialist, because socialism, the system, is what I want and then what I want to maintain. Marxism is, on the other hand, a philosophy. So I am uh, philosophically a Marxist, because philosophy is not about what you want with the world, but how you understand the world. There are those that say that, oh, Marxism is also like an ideology, but that's, I would say that's more so. It is technically a philosophy, but when you understand things from a Marxist point of view, um, it's much more difficult not to be a socialist or communist because of how you see the world. Um, so yeah, I'm a Marxist because I see the world from the point of view that, well, Marxists do, which Marxism basically means dialectical materialism with focus on class. And it's materialism is basically that everything is part of the material world, everything is connected in some kind of way. Dialectics is how it's connected, if I'm not mistaken. And so those two together is how everything in society is connected. And then, of course, with the focus on class and class society, which we have seen time and time again. For example, slavers and slaves, two separate classes.
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation of that. Well, how did you come to the conclusion that like socialism is the optimal economic system? Is it something that you were just kind of born that way and raised that way, or did you have like an epiphany later on in life where you decided that that would be the best way to understand the world?
Well, you see, I had this man in the clouds that spoke to me while I was asleep. Uh, nah, just kidding. No offense, by the way, to any
No,
Christians or
you're
any.
good, man.
I am an atheist, by the way, but I'm an agnostic atheist. So while I, for various reasons, don't believe in any religion, I also do not claim to know for a fact that this or that religion aren't true. Just to get that out of the way.
Oh yeah, I've had a lot of people on my show that are like that, so totally
Yeah.
understand.
So back to your question there. Well, I've always been left and left leaning. That's always been my immediate environment, with my family, with my parents, with my siblings. Um, and it's been a more social democratic environment, so not like fully socialism, but there's also been some views, I guess, that have been more straight up socialist, perhaps. But well, there's I I'm actually thankful in a way of all the hardships I have had to endure, um, mostly due to my ADD and autism, because um, society is not made for people like me, and I didn't even know I had those things until I was over 18. So, like, my entire school life was filled with people like periodically making fun of me or bullying me, and I didn't even know, like, what's different with me. I don't know. I don't understand what's going on, and they don't exactly explain. They just tell me, like, oh, you're different, but they never say, like, how you're different. And um, while there's been some trauma and whatnot, like, I eat antidepressant medicine every day, and I have done for several years now, because of how I've been treated previously in school. And all of this basically culminate in me questioning more and more, like, why is it this way? Why isn't society built in such a way where people such as myself um, can thrive? Like, sure, there are people with various diagnoses that can thrive, no question, but generally speaking, not really. Like, not. I think you get what I mean. And
Yeah.
I mean, in Sweden, you hear all these positive things like, oh, we're a democracy, and of course it's not perfect, but it's pretty good, and we have good welfare, and school's not too bad, and we hear all these positive things. But then you, like, you recount your own experiences, and then you look at other people's experiences, and then you look at the real historical data, and I don't know, like, it's like everything combined, and you just start asking these questions, like, why does it have to be like this, and such. And that took me on a journey, I could say, and it took years. This process of radicalization, as we call it. I proudly declare myself a radical, not an extremist, because I think the two are different. It's my cat, by the way, who wants to be here. Her name is Erik.
Oh, nice. Love it.
She's. I named her after a character from Final Fantasy. So she probably wants food, but I'm busy, so I'm not going to give her food. Yeah, so it's you start connecting the dots, and it took me years. I went, I'd say, you know, like these 6 steps or whatever it's called. You know, is it grief? It's like denial, acceptance,
Yeah.
compromise. I basically went through something similar like that, because I can remember this period when I was like, okay, so there's all these people that want capitalism and all these people that want socialism, so maybe I can somehow figure out a new system that's like a combination of the two. And then sooner or later I realized, now that's stupid. So I've went from being like a sort of center leftist to being more radical leftist, where radical only really means that I want big changes in society. It's not like I don't want to burn stuff down. I don't want to take up a gun and start shooting people. Like, that's not what I mean. I that's not what I want. I want big societal changes, and yeah, that's where I went from being like a social democrat to being a radical revolutionary socialist. I still believe in reform, but I want a like revolutionary, like a revolutionary version, if that makes sense, of a reform. So instead of taking up guns to change society, I want an overwhelming majority of people to want change, and then we force that change by the fact that we are a big majority. So, yeah, from a social democrat to this.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I wanted to ask you too about this too. How would you define the left and the right, and are those even really like meaningful categories for thinking about politics? Because in the United States, we have the Republicans and the Democrats, and everyone in America pretends like they're different parties, but they all support the same corporations and the same wars and everything. Like, there's really no difference between the Republicans in Congress and the Democrats in Congress, except on some very minor social issues. So there's not really like a left-right spectrum in the U.S. How do you understand the difference between the left and the right? What do you think about that?
Well, it I think we first have to go back to the very beginning of the terms, and it goes back to God. I'm not good with dates, but it's like a couple of 100 years ago. I think it was France. Um, there was this, like, I think it was Congress or something, and the people that sat on the left in this place, they wanted to remove the monarchy. They wanted to progress to something new, to something more democratic. Whereas the people that sat on the right in this room, they wanted to conserve the monarchy that was. They didn't want to change up the status quo. So that is where left, right, slash progressive, conservative actually comes from. Um, which is also interesting because there's very often, and I used to do this myself, but I don't do it anymore. There's typically this distinction made between liberals and conservatives, but if we want to get technical, everyone on the right is conservative because that's what right means, to be a conservative. You want to preserve the status quo. You might want some changes, but you don't want like to overthrow the system. That's not what a right winger slash conservative wants. So all liberals are technically speaking conservatives, but not all conservatives are liberals, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a
And
lot of
this
sense.
whole Democratic versus Republican Party thing, um, yeah, it's it feels a bit irritating as an actual leftist, as a progressive person, as a socialist and Marxist, to hear people say that the Democratic Party, which is a liberal right wing conservative party, that when they say that's a left party, like, no, it's between two right wing parties. One that is what is called social liberal, and the other is social conservative. Um, and that's like the only real difference between the two parties. One is more socially progressive, the other is more socially conservative. But other than that, as you said, like they still serve the same corporate overlords. They still take the same money from the same people, the same donors. They still like unilaterally agree on war and such. It's like the biggest difference when it comes to foreign politics for these two parties is that like um, the Democratic Party wants to like destroy Russia and then destroy China, whereas the Republican Party is like, no, 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 let's just skip Russia and go straight to China. And that's like the biggest difference between them, really, when it comes to foreign policies. Um, but yeah, I personally think that left, right, slash progressive, conservative are useful terms. Um, Basically, it's not the term's fault that they have been bastardized by people that either do it on purpose or people that don't know. In which case, if they don't know, I don't exactly blame them for not knowing. Um, but yeah, I do think it's useful terms, and I also would like to add that I see it as I see a difference between someone is born more progressive or born more conservative. I see that as different from like actively engaging in progressivism or conservatism, if that makes any sense to you.
Yeah, no, I think that was a really great description, and that actually leads very well into my next question here. A lot of American right wingers conflate communism and socialism, like they make it sound like they're the same thing. A lot of the times, it's because American conservatives have never actually read any of the literature, and so they don't understand the distinctions. But talk to us about that. What's the difference between communism and socialism?
It's quite interesting because there are socialists and communists that would argue that they are the same. I have personally debated with people that say this, um, but I I personally think that they are different, and because they are different enough, it's important to um, keep them like distinctive. I usually um, I like to say that both of them are on the socialist spectrum. Like the socialist spectrum spans basically the entire left, and there's all these different variations of socialism. Like social democracy is not. It's sort of try to combine socialism with liberalism and capitalism. So it takes aspects from socialism, but it's not like straight up socialist. Um, and then communism is, you could say, a form of socialism that exists on the socialist spectrum, but it's also separate from the system we call socialism, if that makes any sense. And what more specifically differs is I I know there are those that would disagree with me here, but according to my personal understanding, the difference is that communism is like this. It's such a highly developed um, stage of mankind, if you will, that there is no state, there is no class, and there is no money because none of it is needed. Um, Whereas socialism, it still has a state, and it has money, but it doesn't have class because when everyone is part of the working class, because under capitalism you have the capitalist class and the working class, and if we delete, to put it mildly, the capitalist class from existence and basically pull every capitalist into the working class. When we only have one class in society, it basically eradicates class society, because if there's only one class, how can it be class society? You know. So
Right.
that's basically the main difference as I see it. Socialism is all the things I said previously in the beginning of the interview, and and communism is that plus there is no state. There might be a government, but not a state, and there is no money, and that's basically the difference I see it. So I happily am friends with communists. I don't see a reason to be against communists just because I'm not a communist. I don't want communism. I want socialism because I see positives with both the state and money. So I want to keep that. But I'm also in favor of countries becoming communist if they so choose to when they have advanced in socialism far enough, because that is also something to note that um, realistically speaking, you need to advance a society to socialism before it can become communism. So all communists want socialism, but not all socialists want communism, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I get where you're coming from with that. Well, one of the cornerstones of socialism is the idea of economic regulation. So I want to ask you two different questions. In your view, what is the advantage of economic control and regulation, and then what are some of the disadvantages of the free market?
The first question was if the positives with economic regulation.
Yes. I tell you what. Why don't we take these in reverse then? What would you see as being some of the disadvantages of the free market? Why do we need economic control?
Well, that's okay. So first things first. Like there has never really been a free market as advertised. It's always been this, like dream, this idealistic dream that never really exists. Like the closest we ever truly got to a free market was at the beginning stages of capitalism, but then that naturally evolved to like more monopolist imperialism, colonialism, even its own form of slavery and what have you, because it benefited capitalists. Um, and I mean that's basically what quote unquote free markets got us. It like um, you know slavery, for example. Slavery has always existed in one form or another, but this specific chattel slavery that the British people had in North America, that was explicitly thanks to capitalism, because these slavers, they owned the means of production, and they were greedy, and they didn't care about these people, so they used humans as like they owned both what the laborers produced, and they owned the people. And this is basically a byproduct, if you will, of the so-called free market, because I mean that's basically where no regulations get you in a society with a system that promotes greediness and um, um, like you get further in life if you're greedy, and that's what this system promotes. That's what this system is, and these lack of regulations, it does that kind of thing. I mean, right now in America, there's like a resurgence of child labor. Have you heard about that?
There have been some arguments about that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've
like
seen some of that.
even if it's technically not legal on like a national level, it's still like the fact that it happens. It's yeah, that's why I don't like these free markets, or what they are in real life, because it's it's not about people's well-being. It's about a few people's pockets, basically, and then anything goes if they lack the morals, and those that get to the top will lack morals because they know how to play the game, so to speak. That's why the people at the top are so immoral, because it's their lack of morality that got them there in the first place, and no one else can get there because that's what the system incentivizes and promotes. And regulations, it can help. I'm since I'm not a social democrat, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, you just need to regulate the market a little bit and that's going to fix everything. Like, just regulate a bit more and you're going to stop seeing so many homeless people in America. No, that's not like there's some core underlying issues that regulations themselves are not going to solve. But regulations are still good because they can, well, regulate what you can and cannot do. And I dare not think what a capitalist society without any regulations would look like, because that would be like, ooh, a nightmare.
No, I see what you're saying there. Well, let me ask you another follow up question to that. So, in a socialist system, how what is the best way to going about making those market regulations happen? So, who makes those decisions, and what's the most reasonable or responsible way to make those kind of calculated economic decisions about regulation and production and things like that?
It's a collaborative effort, suffices to say. That's one of the big misconceptions about socialism that has been um, said time and time and time again. Like, you hear it everywhere, especially in Western societies, about how, oh, in socialist countries, it's the government that decided everything, and it's so authoritarian. And but then when you like when you actually look at what happened in, for example, the Soviet Union, it wasn't that the government didn't like control everything. There were, I mean, Soviets. That's their names for workers' counselors, or councils, and so basically the people that did the work went together and like talked, and then they had representatives of these groups or councils, these Soviets. These representatives then had connections to the government and what have you, and then basically the government did what the people wanted. Suffice it to say.
So, where in your mind are some examples of where socialism has been implemented successfully? And then where are some examples where capitalism, as you understand it, has failed?
From my current knowledge, and I'm a very honest person, so everything I say it because I truly believe it. There's no manipulation, there's no anything like that, because I hate lying. I hate to lie. Just to get that out. So when I say that I actually believe that every single implementation of socialism has been successful, I mean that because I actually believe that. Now, have they all been equally successful? No. Have there been mistakes? Yes, because no society is perfect. And as a little side note, have you noticed that socialist countries have historically been looked at? They've been there's been like much harsher looks on socialist countries. Like, um, if we take a socialist and capitalist country and they do an equal amount of mistakes, then the socialist country will be judged harder just for being socialist, even if they did the exact same amount of mistakes as the capitalist one. Um, so that's something to keep in mind. Um, but yeah, according to my knowledge, and I have done research, I've watched, for example, I watch these communist Marxist on YouTube, and they bring up old documents, books, um, photos. video clips and what have you, like these actual sources that say that no, it was actually pretty successful. Like the Soviet Union, um, if it had existed today, it might very well have went past the United States of America as the most quote unquote rich country. Um, but then there's but then one might ask, but what about all these um, like why do they seem to fail? Like why was the Soviet Union, like why doesn't it exist then? And Venezuela and Cuba and all that. And the thing is, when you actually look into these things, you notice that it's not because the system was bad, or even necessarily because the government was bad, was or because the leader was bad, but it's external sabotage. Like um, Cuba to this day has a brutal embargo that basically in practice forbids companies from around the world to do business with them. Because if you do business with Cuba, then America can come in and say, well, you did business with Cuba, so you're not going to do business with us. And America is a much bigger business partner than Cuba, so that basically incentivizes many companies around the world from doing anything with Cuba. Not to mention actual coup attempts and like 600 plus assassination attempts at Fidel Castro by the
Right.
CIA and what have you. And when it comes to the Soviet Union, for example, um, that was basically um, that was actually a case of corruption spreading to the very top of the government, because it was like a few people at the very top that, together with some prominent Western figures, that together against the wishes of the Soviet people um, got rid of the Union. Like if you look at, because before the dissolution, you can look this up. There's a they did polling on each of the 15 nations within the union to see what all the people thought, if they wanted to keep the union or if they wanted to get rid of it. And a majority of people in every single republic, they wanted to keep the union. And in some places, such as Russia, it was a far majority, and yet it was destroyed from within. And like overnight, capitalists from the West came in and just bought up everything. So that was a case of corruption at the top, and that was, in my eyes, an actual failure of the Soviet society from protecting itself from um, invasive ideological forces, if that makes any sense. Like, if I think personally that everything, well, not everything, literally everything, but generally speaking, things started going downhill after Joseph Stalin, because the guy that came right after him uh, lied a bunch, basically, and there's proof of this, that these are lies told about how Stalin was a dictator and what have you. And after that, the top in the government, they were not necessarily bad, but they got progressively a bit worse and worse. And it's sad to see that the government of the Soviet Union couldn't like shield itself properly from people that didn't believe as firmly as the previous leaders, if that makes sense.
No, it completely does. And I mean, to your point there, this is one of like the libertarian critiques of American foreign policy. We all believe that after World War II, the United States should have just left Europe and the rest of the world alone and returned home. But it was like, President Eisenhower said, they built up this giant military industrial complex and went all over the world trying to enforce by military might American ideology onto everyone else. And I don't think that we ever should have gotten involved in Korea. I don't think we ever should have gotten involved in Vietnam. I mean, I think all of those were completely illegitimate. And I'm with you on that. Like, even in those communist countries, the CIA had a hand in manipulating the politics of all of those countries. And we're seeing that exact same thing in the Middle East today. Like, over the last 20 years, the CIA has been, and the Department of Defense and all of the military industrial apparatus in the United States has been rolling out the exact same playbook in the Middle East that they use to fight the communists. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there are a lot of people that make a ton of money in the United States on war. And that's a huge problem. And actually, I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later in our conversation here. That's definitely one of the areas that we would both agree that like American imperialism and military might is a bad thing. But before we get to that, I did want to talk to you about trade deals with countries under a socialist system. So I know, like, for people that I guess are communist, that has to do with the idea of like international revolution. So true communists want to see kind of the dissolution of these borders between countries. But for socialists, you don't necessarily, like you said before, have a problem with the existence of states. In a socialist regime, how do countries determine who to trade with and what to trade and all of those kinds of things? How do we deal with international trade in a socialist system?
Well, this is one point I regretfully don't think I know enough about. I don't know. I'm honest, at least.
That's fair. No, it's fair enough.
But from what I know and from what I think personally, I would say, I mean, trade isn't really a problem. Like, I don't think what you want as a libertarian actually, for the most part, goes against what I want as a socialist when it comes to international trade, because I'm of the mind that trade should be pretty free, so to speak. It just depends on like certain situations, like illegal stuff, or such as I as I said before, I'm not good with dates, but like long ago, there were like two wars between the British Empire and China, because the Brits wanted to sell drugs in China, and China didn't want that. And then they basically told the Chinese, "Well, fuck you, we're going in." And so like that kind of quote unquote trade relationship is nothing I like. And I also don't like the kind of trade you see under neo-colonialism, where it's like America doesn't go into like Middle Eastern countries and put up an American flag and say, "Well, you're our colony now." Instead, they extract their resources, they buy up their land, they take their stuff basically, and I don't like that kind of again, quote unquote trade relationships. But other than that, I don't really see a problem with like private individuals trading stuff, or if there's something I see online that's made in America, then shit, I'm gonna buy it. Like I
Right.
last year I actually bought my engagement rings for my fiance. I bought them from America, from some like small time business person in America, and I'm happy with them. Uh,
Yeah.
in fact, you can see here's my ring. I don't know.
Oh yeah, looks good.
It's a custom made Zelda ring from The Legend of Zelda. Both her and I am big fans of Zelda, so
Well, man, I really agree with that. And to your point, I mean, there's kind of like the libertarian joke that we jokingly refer to the United States' 2003 illegal invasion of Iraq as Operation Iraqi Liberation because the acronym for that is OIL, oil, which is really what I mean. It wasn't what it was all about, but that was a giant consideration when we decided to invade Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11 or anything like that. So I completely understand that point that you make there. Another question I want to ask you about this. I want to talk about Nazi Germany, and then I want to go back and talk about Soviet Russia before we start talking about war here. Members of the Nazi Party of Germany were called National Socialist, and that's what Nazi stands for. In your view, is there a difference between the National Socialism of Germany in the 1930s and 40s and your understanding of the term socialism?
Well, at the end of the day, aren't we all just a little bit Nazi? No, but seriously, yeah, that's it's good that you bring that up because this is also a very common misunderstanding. It's like, I mean, they call themselves socialists, so of course they must have been socialists. Well, when you look at it, at that time in Germany and Europe as a whole, socialism was very popular. It was very, very popular amongst the working class people. Um, and Adolf Hitler and the others, they weren't stupid. They knew this, and so they took the word socialist and basically stripped everything from it. And I think there's I'm paraphrasing, but there's something that Hitler said himself about like, yeah, I'm gonna take socialism and make it better or whatever, and like take it away from those Jewish Marxist Bolsheviks, whatever. Um, so they basically took socialism as a slogan or whatever you want to call it. So it's like, we're nationalists and we're socialists. Hey, we're come to us. We know these things are popular. So that's basically why they call themselves National Socialists, because socialism was popular, and that was a way for them to attract people to the party and to their ideology. But when push come to shove, communists and socialists were the first people to get prosecuted, to get executed, to get followed. Like, it wasn't even Jews that were the first people. It was communists and then socialists that were the very first victims of the Holocaust and before the Holocaust. So this idea that it's a form of socialism or that it's left at all is partially a misunderstanding and then partially a tactic by anti-socialists who want to associate socialism with the horrors of Nazism. So even though it has socialism in the name, it has literally nothing to do with socialism. Like, if you look at what Hitler did, um, I mean, let's just look at the word privatize. That word became a thing and was coined to specifically describe what they did in Nazi Germany. So they didn't collectivize anything. They didn't nationalize. Maybe they nationalized something, but like, they weren't doing what the Soviet Union did. They privatized things. They were private capitalists that took over like everything, and they had the full support of the Nazi Party because they were ideologically the same. Fascism and Nazism serve capital, basically. So it has nothing to do with socialism other than name.
I think I know where you're going to go with this next question here, but in the Soviet Union, China, and Cambodia during the latter half of the 20th century, millions of people did die under those conditions. I guess, would you attribute that to outside interference and because you're talking about with Nikita Khrushchev, the successor to Joseph Stalin, there was a lot of corruption in the upper levels of the Soviet leadership. Would that be your answer to that question? Essentially, that those deaths could have been preventable had it not been from outside influence?
I think I can give a better answer if you can give a more specific example.
Yeah. So, for instance, under collectivization in China, Mao's Great Leap Forward, there were millions of people that died of starvation during that time. How would you, I guess, handle that historical reality if you were trying to explain it to somebody from the outside?
Well, first things first, I'm not going to deny that people died. Once again, no system is perfect. We try things, and sometimes it doesn't work out. And when it comes to historical China, I know decently well about it, but I don't know like details or whatever. But what I do know is that after China finished industrializing, they have not had a single famine. They have not had any starvation on a mass scale since they did their thing. So I don't personally know like what caused a lot of death. I do know that historically China has had periodically famines, um, as did Russia and many other places before they got industrialized. So I'm not gonna like, so to speak, explain it away as I don't know. It's like it's just fake, but it's rather it's a bit more complex, if you will. But I do know it's not the fault of socialism itself. It's not collectivization itself that led specifically to um, worsening conditions. Like maybe some place in China or would be Soviet Union or Soviet Union, maybe some place collectivization had a first initial um, bad reaction, but as a whole, collectivization, as far as I understand it, did not contribute, or at the very least, did not start anything. On the other hand, or not on the other hand, but instead, it actually led to them never having these big problems with starvation.
Okay, what do you think of large globalist organizations like the World Economic Forum? Because, I mean, on Twitter, we've both been very critical of the World Economic
Yeah.
Forum, I think for different reasons. But from your socialist perspective, what is your problem with an organization like the World Economic Forum?
I think a prime example is that also famous quote about owning nothing. Um, because that's also a misconception about socialists and communists that, oh, we just want the government to own everything. No. We also make a distinction between personal and private property. When your personal property, that's like your toothbrush, your TV, your car, your house, what have you, and private property is well, the means by which we produce stuff. So like a factory or a farm, or something like that. And we want like democratic collective control of um, private property. We don't want private property, but we do support personal property. Um, we want people to own their houses and own their apartments and own their stuff and not have to rent, for example. I personally don't like rent at all. Like I'm just fully against renting. Um, I think everyone deserves a place to call their home. Um, no strings attached, basically, for just being a human being. And so when I hear stuff like, "Oh, you'll own nothing," I can connect that and see like, ah, that the reason they say that is because they want capitalists to own everything, and we have to rent from them. Like it's who would own the car you don't own? Who would own the subscription or whatever that you are only renting, if you will? You the games or house or whatever it is, who would actually own it? Well, it would be the capitalists. So that's only one aspect of the World Economic Forum that I heavily disagree with, because I actually want to own my own stuff. I don't want some some suit sitting somewhere in a different part of the country actually owning what I use every day. And yeah, I don't
Yeah.
like that organization. Like they can, quite frankly, they can fuck off to oblivion.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you on that one too. I'm not a big fan of the WEF. Last question I want to ask you before we get to war, and we got a few minutes left here. How would you understand democracy, and are the United States and Sweden in any way really democracy? I mean, I know, again, from my libertarian perspective in the United States, I think that at least the democracy that we have in the United States is completely an illusion. Our country is run by politicians and bureaucrats and corporations, and we don't really have any say or any input in how that works. And there is, as I'm sure you know, really, and you've already kind of stated this before, in the United States, there's really no difference between the Republican and Democratic Party establishment. Like, they're the exact same party on almost every issue except for a handful of cultural issues. But I wanted to get your perspective on that. In what sense is Sweden and the United States a democracy? Are they not a democracy? Is that a good thing? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I agree with everything you said, and I find that so interesting that you and I, who are like technically speaking ideologically opposed one another, that we still think so much alike. I find that interesting. To your question, it yeah, I don't consider either country to be a democracy. Truth be told, like there are people that say, well, of course America isn't one, but Sweden is actually a real democracy. But no, no, as a Swede, I feel really powerless. I have like always felt so powerless, and in a real actual democracy, that's not how you should feel. You should never have to feel powerless in an actual democracy. Um, we have a more functioning or more democratic society than America. That I can say that for certain. But it's still like, I mean, it's still at the end of the day capitalists that basically control the society. We just have more regulations. We just have more unions. There's just it that's like the big difference between a so-called liberal democracy and a social democracy. The social democracy is like an improved version of the liberal democracy that takes in a few aspects of socialism, but it still ultimately serves capital. So we have we vote for representatives and all that, but it's like we've even gone to a situation where there's like our left wing parties are more and more so agreeing with our right wing parties because they are social democratic, and social democrats are technically left but also very connected to the right, so to speak. So, well, simply put, it's I wouldn't fully count like even Sweden, which is praised by so many. I wouldn't even say we are a true democracy. We are a form of democracy, as is America, I guess. But it's like, once again, I don't exactly feel like I hold any power. It's still the top politicians. I mean, we are like so close to entering NATO, and I don't fucking want to go into NATO. I know it's an offensive alliance, but
Yeah,
yeah,
amen.
our top politicians just keep going on with the bullshit. NATO, it's a defensive alliance, and oh, like there's right now, there's a like a fucking warmongering hysteria going on in Sweden as we speak, um, thanks to our government and our military top, because they are um, saying stuff like we have to prepare for an eventual invasion, and there's all of this scaremongering about Russia, and it's like when you actually look at the truth of geopolitics, it's like, why the hell would they invade us? Oh, they invaded Ukraine, but that's because there's a history between the two, and there's so many ethnic Russians that were oppressed in Ukraine. So, like, it's a completely different situation. They're not going to invade Sweden, and yet they're like, oh, they're going to invade Sweden, so now let's go into NATO to be safe from the evil Russian hordes. But it's like, that's not even what the people of Sweden want. And the people that do want it, most of them want it because the politicians tell them that it's good. They don't do the research. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, and this is like the perfect segue into the final part of the show here. I think the most important similarity between libertarians and socialists is our absolute hatred for war and for the warfare state. And again, like to your point, I think anyone that looks at what's happening in Ukraine right now objectively understands that at the end of the Cold War, the United States gave the Russians these promises that we weren't going to expand NATO to the east of Germany, and we've done nothing but expand NATO. And from the Russian perspective, I can understand how the invasion of Ukraine would be seen as a defensive move because the United States has been imperialistic in its ambition, and NATO has been one of the organizations that they've used to increase that reach. And again, if you look at the last 20 years, the United States government, not we, I wasn't responsible for that, but the United States government has invaded 7 countries in the Middle East and burned them to the ground. So if I was the Russian government, I'd be nervous about what the United States would do to me too. This is where I want to ask you, as a socialist, what is your critique of war from your perspective within your kind of socialist worldview? Why is war so incompatible with your position on economics?
So I would like to state that there is such a thing as a just war, such as when the Soviet Union went to war with Nazi Germany. That was a just war because, well, I think that feels pretty self-explanatory. Um,
Yeah.
but the kind of wars that you're talking about, yeah, I fully agree because they are just imperialism that's coated with a bunch of words about democracy and like we're gonna bring democracy and freedom to the Middle East by bombing them to the Middle Ages and ransacking their villages and raping their women and children and taking their stuff. And like the US is still occupying like a third of I think it's Syria, where they produce most of their oil, and illegally, without Syria's approval, they're just taking their oil. And that's like, as you said, that's what these wars are essentially about. It's about like um, economic control. It's about taking resources, about destabilizing places that are opposed to what you're doing, and exerting influence in regions and what have you. I think Israel, that's the name.
Yes.
Israel is actually a good example of this because if you go back many years, I think it was the 90s or 80s, Joe Biden, there's like a clip you can easily find of Joe Biden saying something like, if there wasn't an Israel, we would just create an Israel, because it's basically like the 51st state of America, and they
Yep.
unilaterally and so fervently support Israel, not because Israel controls America, but because Israel acts as a influence, if you will, a defender of American control in the region. Um, yeah, and that's war sucks, and all these wars that we're talking about, they're waged because there's some people that, for whatever reason, just don't give a shit how many lives they destroy. They just want to fill their pockets more, and they have the power to do it. And not enough people are informed to actually organize and unite against them. So the people, so to speak, let it happen because they don't know any better, or because they are powerless because there's so few of them that know. So yeah, war is shit.
Yep. Hey, I'm totally with you, and this is one of the things that, like, I mean, you and I would definitely agree on this issue. If you look at like the profit margins of the defense companies that more or less run a lot of the politicians in the United States, you got Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, GE. We have been going through a time of recession in the U.S., and if you look at the stock profiles of those defense companies between the war in Ukraine and now the war in Israel, and now, you know, just as of last night, are the probable war that we're going to be waging in Iran, those companies' profit margins are so much higher than other corporations in the United States because they're receiving all of our tax dollars to build bombs that go. So there are all kinds of financial incentives, and these are the same, you know, corporations that have the lobbyists that give kickbacks to our politicians. So the whole thing's just insidious and corrupt, and it's all just war for profit for a handful of people at the top, and it's really terrible. The final question I want to ask you about this before we wrap up today is, as a non-American, and I think I know that you're going to say yes to this, would you characterize America as an empire? And then what's the best way to go about curbing the power of American foreign policy? Like, how do we put an end to America's militarism around the world?
Well, the movies tell me that America is the greatest country to have ever existed, so I don't know. But yeah, it is. I would definitely say that, like, not even as an opinion. I would say that as a matter of fact, it is by definition an empire. What's so
Yeah.
interesting, I think, is that America is not a traditional empire per se, like the one that came before, the British Empire, which was, you know, the way you think of an empire. Um, but America, it's a new sort of empire where instead of, as I said earlier, instead of going to a place in the Middle East and putting up an American flag and saying, "You're our colony," instead of doing that, they will go to a country, destabilize it, buy up their land, put them in debt, and put their own people in power, basically. They will do all these things. Um, they don't even have to be with war. Like, they don't even have to bring war to a country. But they use, like, this is an empire that is about economics, basically, at its core. That is how they go about their imperial business. They don't put up American flags. They instead, I mean, they don't need to. It's actually quite brilliant if you think about it. Like, and that's not even a compliment. That's just shit. That's actually quite brilliant. They don't
Right.
have to do that and have, like, I don't know, but yeah, it's definitely an empire, and I can't wait to see it crumble. I hope to live long enough to see the day that the American empire officially falls and the world is finally free of its grasp, including the American people. Because, like, I feel sorry for you guys. I feel sorry for you personally that you have to
Thank you.
endure this, and yeah, like, their influence is everywhere. Like, their influence over my country is like staggering, I would say. So I saw the other day something about now apparently America wants Sweden to uh, help out against like Yemen, I think it was.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
um, doing the stuff with the trade with the ships. They like
Mm.
want us to go in there and be on their side. Um, so yeah, it is definitely like by definition an empire, and just like every other empire in history, it will one day crumble. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah. And I think, again, if you look at America's fiscal situation right now, we're $34 trillion in debt. Our former chairwoman of the Federal Reserve, Janet Yellen, said that we can't afford to fight three wars all at the same time, and we just can't. So, like, eventually the bill is going to become due. And I don't see this lasting for much longer. And I keep on telling people this, and they just think that because it's the United States, it's going to last forever. But same thing happened to the Roman Empire and all the other empires that came before, that you get too big, you expand too much, and you just can't survive. And so I guess there maybe is a silver lining. It'll be painful in the interim, but I do think that a world where the American empire is not the dominant world empire is a much better one than a world where it is. Before I let you go here, for people that want to learn more about socialism, what resources would you recommend? So for someone that wants to explore more and just get a better understanding for how socialism works, how the ideology functions, what are some resources you would recommend?
Well, before I cover that, I just want to make a last comment on the previous point because I think what you talked about is interesting because it makes me think of what is known as capitalist realism, which is basically this false idea, if you will, that capitalism is all there is. There can't be something better. It's what it is, and it will always remain this way, no matter how far into the future we look. Um, and there's so many people that think like that, like they can't even imagine, they can't even use their fantasy to see beyond the borders of capitalism. Like, and that's very sad because like there's been so many systems before capitalism, so why shouldn't there be an after? You know, like even if, whether you like capitalism or not, like that's just a fact. Like there have been so many systems before it, so why can't there be something after it? Um, and on to your final question there. A very good place to start, I would say, is with the YouTube channel Second Thought. It's a very basic level of understanding socialism and getting a more Marxist perspective. Um, there's also Hakim and Yugopnik, um, and they all three of them together also have a podcast called Deprogram. I think they are great people. And then there's Revolutionary Blackout Network. I don't know if you've heard about them.
Mm-mm.
Okay, that they're in the U.S. It's basically an organization of African Americans. They have YouTube and they have Twitter, and um, they are communists and socialists and Marxists. And um, for me, as a Swede with European descent, it was, I wouldn't say eye opening per se, but it was very interesting to get an African American's perspective, which you get with Revolutionary Blackout Network. So they are also um, good guys, I think, to to check out for information. Um, I was thinking about some more people. I don't know, but I can also recommend the wiki page called Prole Wiki. Prole is short for proletariat or the working class, and it's an alternative to Wikipedia. that is by Marxists, and it's done by like two people, so it only has so much info on it currently. But I think it's a very interesting project, and when you read on ProLiViki and compare to Wikipedia, you can see that the same event can be described very differently. And I think it's a good source of information about whatever it might be. And well, yeah. Oh, and Midwestern Marx, a U.S. based organization. They even have classes. I've heard. So yeah, that's some people / organizations I recommend people check out.
Yeah, well, Erik, thanks again for coming on the show today. Where can people find and follow you?
Well, the only place I'm really hanging out on is Twitter, or X, which I refuse to say because it's so fucking stupid.
Me too.
It's Twitter, come on, man. But yeah, it's Twitter. It's what was it, like, at Alpha Class Arc? Yeah, what you said at the very beginning of this.
Perfect.
That's like the only place you can really find me, and I will say, I'm not sure if warning is the correct word, but I can get emotional. So sometimes I'm very respectful, like I am to you, and other times I can be more bombastic in my hatred for right-wing ideas and people, if you will. But it's not like I'm not gonna. I don't know. I'm not gonna like curse off some libertarian that just goes to my profile to check it out. Like I'm pretty friendly, I'd say.
Well, man, I really do appreciate you coming on the show today, Erik. Thank you so much for doing this.
It was a blast to be on here, and I hope I can come back sometime. It was great.
Yeah, we'll have to make that happen, man. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at theprotestantlibertarian@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter. You can follow me at the handle @ProLibertyPod. Again, that is @ProLibertyPod. And you can also visit me at theprotestantlibertarianpodcast.com. At theprotestantlibertarianpodcast.com, you can also support the Christians for Liberty Network and the Libertarian Christian Institute. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode, and we will see you next Tuesday.